If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make
There is nothing wrong with your screen. Do not attempt to adjust the settings. You're hearing my voice because you were meant to find this. But before we dive into the static, I have to ask, where in this chaotic world are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. I want to know how far this signal is reaching. Most people remember The Outer Limits as just another black and white relic. They see grainy footage, rubber masks, and mid-century actors shouting at the ceiling. They think it's a budget version of The Twilight Zone. They couldn't be more wrong. While other shows were busy teaching moral lessons with a wink to the camera, this show was busy dissecting the human soul under a cold, surgical light. It wasn't trying to entertain you. It was trying to warn you. I've spent weeks digging through the archives, looking past the static, and what I found is disturbing. There are details hidden in plain sight, choices made by creators who were operating under a level of pressure you wouldn't believe. These 15 details don't just change the way you watch the show, they change the way you look at reality itself. Let's start with the most obvious lie. The control voice. You remember the opening, right? An anonymous, godlike entity telling you that they control the horizontal and the vertical. Most fans think this was just a cool gimmick to set the mood. It wasn't. Internally, the creators viewed the control voice as a metaphor for the television networks themselves, and by extension, the government. In the early 60s, the idea that a voice could hijack your home was the ultimate psychological trigger. They were telling you, right to your face, that you are being programmed. And yet we all sat there and listened. Then there's the bear. That was the internal nickname for the monster of the week. But here's what nobody tells you. The network demanded a monster in every episode to keep the kids watching, but the writers hated it. They wanted to explore the inner limits, the darkness in your mind. So they started doing something genius. They began hiding the monsters in the shadows, not because they lacked the budget, but because they realized that what your mind imagines in the dark is 10 times more terrifying than anything they could build out of latex. Notice the lighting. It's not just noir, it's claustrophobic. They used a technique of high-contrast cinematography that intentionally left large portions of the frame pitch black. Why? Because in 1963, the world was on the brink of nuclear annihilation. That darkness on your screen represented the void we were all about to step into. Every episode was a rehearsal for the end of the world. Presta atenção nisso agora. Look at the eyes of the actors. There's a specific episode where a character undergoes a horrific mutation. In the HD remasters, you can see something the original viewers couldn't. The actor isn't just playing scared. There's a genuine look of physical discomfort. That's because the prosthetic materials they used back then were often toxic or caused skin reactions. They were literally suffering for the art of scaring you. It adds a layer of raw physical reality to the fiction that you just can't fake with modern CGI. But that's just the surface level. We haven't even touched the prohibited themes. The show frequently tackled things like government-sanctioned human experimentation and the loss of individual identity. At the height of the Cold War, this was dangerous territory. There's one specific detail in an episode involving alien guests that was almost censored because it mirrored a classified military project too closely. They had to change the dialogue at the last minute to avoid a visit from the authorities. The deeper you go, the more you realize that the show wasn't about them, the aliens, the monsters, the mutants. It was always about us. It was a mirror held up to a society that was losing its grip on its own humanity. The outer limits weren't in space, they were the boundaries of what we are willing to do to each other when we're afraid. You see, the creators knew a secret that we are only now starting to rediscover. Fear is the ultimate tool of control. By showing you the monster, they were actually showing you your own reflection. And that's where things get really uncomfortable, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. We are just getting started. Some of the details I'm about to show you were buried so deep that it took decades for the truth to leak out. Like the fact that one of the most famous creatures was actually designed to trigger a specific primal phobia that is hardwired into the human brain. They weren't just making a TV show, they were conducting a mass psychological experiment on the American public. And wait until we get to the detail about the final episode of the first season. It contains a visual code that was meant to be a direct message to the viewers who were awake. But to understand that, we have to look at the episode that the network tried to bury. Only there's a detail in the production notes of that buried episode that changes the entire meaning of the series finale. It's something so subtle most people blink and miss it. But once you know it's there, the show becomes something much more sinister than a sci-fi anthology. Are you ready to see how deep the static goes? Because what comes next is the part the networks really didn't want you to find. I told you this wasn't just about cheap thrills. We're moving into the territory of the hidden hand. You see, back in the 60s, the line between science fiction and science fact was thinner than a razor blade. This brings us to a detail that almost sounds like a conspiracy. But the production logs don't lie. Pay close attention to the episode involving a soldier from the future. You might think it's just a clever story about time travel, but the detail nobody talks about is the design of the equipment. Some of the schematics shown on screen were so advanced and so eerily similar to classified military prototypes of the time that the production was reportedly questioned by government consultants. The question was, how did a group of Hollywood writers know what a stealth interface might look like decades before the public saw one? This wasn't just imagination, it was an accidental leak of the future. This leads us to a prohibited truth about the show's lighting. You'll notice that The Outer Limits feels much dirtier than The Twilight Zone. It's grittier. It's because the cinematographers were using a style called the glass eye. They weren't just filming actors, they were trying to create a voyeuristic experience. They wanted you to feel like you were peeking through a keyhole at something you weren't supposed to see. It's that feeling of being a trespasser in a world of forbidden knowledge. Now let's talk about the biological clock detail. There's a recurring theme in the series about the human body being hacked, whether it's through radiation, alien DNA, or chemical intervention. Look closely at the transformation scenes. They didn't use the standard Hollywood fade to black for the scary parts. They forced the camera to stay on the mutation. They wanted you to see the loss of self. This was a direct reflection of the 1960s fear of brainwashing and the loss of individual agency. In one specific episode, the monster is literally a man who has been stripped of his ability to choose. If that doesn't sound like a modern-day warning about the digital algorithms we live in today, I don't know what does. Here is something truly unsettling that almost nobody caught. In the background of several laboratory scenes, the equations and diagrams on the chalkboards aren't gibberish. Most shows just scribble nonsense to look smart. The Outer Limits hired real physicists. If you pause the frame and analyze the math, you'll find legitimate theories on entropy and the collapse of the space-time continuum. They were teaching you the physics of your own destruction while you were munching on popcorn. It's a level of detail that speaks to a terrifying commitment to reality. But why go to that much trouble? Because the creators believed that if the science felt real, the fear would stay with you long after the television was turned off. They wanted to infect your mind with the possibility that the impossible was actually inevitable. Look at the way they handled the alien. In most 60s shows, aliens were either gods or invaders. In this show, they were often just reflections. There is a detail in the episode where an alien is put on trial. If you look at the set design, it's a direct mirror of a Cold War interrogation room. The hidden detail here is that the alien isn't the one on trial, humanity is. The dialogue was written as a sharp, aggressive critique of American xenophobia. It was a secret social commentary hidden inside a creature feature. And then there's the sound. Oh, the sound. If you listen with high-quality headphones, you'll hear something the original broadcast speakers couldn't fully reproduce. There is a low-frequency hum used in several high-tension scenes. It's a technique called infrasound. It's a frequency just below the range of human hearing that has been proven to cause feelings of anxiety, sorrow, and even chills down the spine. They weren't just telling a scary story. They were physically manipulating your nervous system. They were hacking your body to make you feel the dread that the characters were feeling. But here is where it gets truly dark. There was a script that never made it to air. A story so bleak, so disturbing for the time, that the network executives allegedly burned the only existing copy of the screenplay. It involved a scenario where humanity discovers that we are the monsters in another species' story, and there is no hope for redemption. The Outer Limits was pushed so far that the system had to snap back and silence it. Think about that for a second. We are talking about a show that was constantly at war with its own masters. A show that used shadows to hide the truth and math to predict the end. It wasn't just a series, it was a Trojan horse. Look at the way the episodes end. Rarely is there a happy ending. Usually there's a sacrifice, a loss, or a haunting question left hanging in the air. This was the anti-sitcom. It was designed to leave you feeling slightly broken at the end of the hour. Because a broken person is a person who starts asking questions, and a person who asks questions is harder to control. There's a specific detail regarding the lead actors that almost feels like a curse. Many of the actors who played the transformed characters reported that they couldn't get the role out of their heads for months. One actor famously said that wearing the mask didn't make him feel like a monster. It made him realize that he had been wearing a human mask his whole life, and the monster was the one underneath. But as heavy as all this sounds, it still doesn't compare to the Project 15 secret. There is a reason why the 15th detail of this show is the one that historians still whisper about. It involves the very last frame of a specific episode, a frame that wasn't supposed to be there, a visual glitch that seems to show a face that doesn't belong to any of the actors or crew. Some call it a ghost in the machine, others call it a warning from the control voice itself. But to understand what that face means, we have to look at how the series was finally brought to its knees, and the chilling message it left behind for us in the future. The static is getting louder, isn't it? We're about to cross the threshold into the most revelatory part of this investigation. What I'm about to tell you next is the part that changes the series from a TV show into a manual for survival. But first you need to understand the cost of looking too closely. We've reached the point of no return. This is where the hidden details stop being about production trivia and start being about the legacy we've inherited. If you've stayed with me this far, you're starting to see the pattern. The show was never about the monsters on the screen, it was about the monster watching the screen. Let's talk about the subliminal architecture. In several episodes, the set designers did something that was practically prohibited by standard television logic. They built sets with non-Euclidean geometry, angles that shouldn't work, doors that led to nowhere, and hallways that seemed to shrink. Why? To induce a state of mild vertigo in the audience. They wanted you to feel physically off balance. It's a detail that experts in psychological warfare call environmental destabilization. By making the physical world of the show feel wrong, they made your own living room feel unsafe. And then there's the identity detail. Look at the credits. You'll see names that would later go on to shape the entire landscape of modern sci-fi. But what nobody tells you is that many of these writers were working under pseudonyms, or were hiding their true intentions from the network. They were using the outer limits as a laboratory for ideas that were considered too subversive for cinema. They were smuggling philosophy into the minds of the masses. Presta tenso nisa agora, the concept of the android. Long before Blade Runner or Westworld, this show was asking the question, what if the thing that looks like you, speaks like you, and cries like you isn't you? But the hidden detail here is the censored protocol. In one specific episode about a mechanical man, the network forced the producers to cut a scene where the android realizes it has more soul than its creator. Why? Because the idea that a machine could be more human than a human was considered a threat to the religious and social morals of the 1960s. They were terrified of the mirror effect. And what about the future echoes? There is a detail in an episode about a global communication network that looks disturbingly like the modern internet. Not the hardware, but the social impact. It predicted a world where humanity would be linked by a signal, but that signal would eventually strip us of our privacy and our sanity. They saw the web coming 60 years ago, and they portrayed it as a trap. In the episode, the characters are so desperate for the connection that they don't realize they are being harvested for their data, or in the show's case, their life force. Sound familiar? Now we have to address the climax of this mystery, the 15th detail, the one that ties the static to the soul. In the final production stages of the original run, there was a growing tension between the control voice and the reality of the world. The detail that almost nobody talks about is the visual glitch in the series finale's master tape. For a fraction of a second, the static doesn't look like electronic noise. If you slow it down to a frame-by-frame analysis, the static forms a pattern that resembles a human DNA strand being unraveled. It was a final silent message from the creators. The control voice isn't just taking over your TV, it's taking over your evolution. The show was telling us that as we become more dependent on the signal, on the screens, the media and the voices that tell us what to think, we are literally losing the code that makes us human. We are being reprogrammed by the very things we use for entertainment. This isn't just a theory, it was the core philosophy of the show's lead creator, who famously felt that television was the greatest tool for mass hypnosis ever invented. Look at the world today. We carry the control voice in our pockets now. We adjust our own horizontal and vertical to fit into the algorithms. We are living in the outer limits every single day, but we've stopped noticing the shadows because the screens are so bright. The cost reel of this show wasn't the budget or the ratings, it was the mental toll on the people who realized the truth. If you ignore the warnings in these stories, you stay trapped in the cycle. You become another bear in the mask, playing a role you didn't choose in a script you didn't write. But you have a choice. You can recognize the static for what it is. This journey through the hidden details of the past isn't just a nostalgia trip, it's an intervention. The creators of The Outer Limits gave us the map to the exit, hidden in the shadows of black and white film. They showed us that the desconocido isn't something to fear. The thing to fear is the control that tells you not to look into the dark. So next time your screen flickers, or you feel that sudden unexplained chill of anxiety while scrolling through your feed, remember the voice. Remember that you are the one who controls the inner limits. If you don't take the wheel, something else will. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and most importantly,
Never let them control the horizontal of your own mind. If this deep dive changed the way you see the static in your life, you know what to do. Subscribe to stay tuned to the frequencies they don't want you to hear. Because the truth isn't just out there, it's right here, hidden in the details.